All right, good morning, viewers, and welcome to this session, which is basically talking about hazards. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about what exactly a hazard is, look at some examples of hazards, and of course, also talk about the types of hazards. Now, a hazard is basically defined as something with the potential to cause harm. So in the workplace, when we do hazard analysis, what we are looking for is within the work area, what are the things that can cause harm? It can be anything, okay? So, for example, if you are in a construction site, there are mobile equipment, right? These can cause harm. There are scaffolding activities. These can cause harm. People are working at height. They can cause harm. There is dust, right? So these are all hazards. Is that okay? Now, the word harm, or say something that can cause harm, we look at it in three categories. The first category is injury and illness. So that thing that is causing harm can either cause you an injury like a cut or laceration, okay, or a fracture, all right, or it can cause you an illness, something like sickness. So, for example, if you have repeated exposure to some kind of toxic fumes, that can result in lung issues or even cancer, right? Now, the second category of harm is property damage. So let's say that hazard is leading to property damage. Imagine driving a forklift, all right? If the forklift hit a structure, okay, that could result in damage to the structure, which is in dollars. So anytime we look at harm in property damage, we are looking at the dollar value or the dollar damage that thing can cause. The last one is damage to the environment. So anything that has a potential to cause damage to the environment, it can be a chemical which is emitting some kind of VOCs, volatile organic compound, or a work process which is emitting toxic or harmful gases into the atmosphere. It can even be greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide. These all cause harm to the environment, and they ought to be classified as harm in terms of environmental damage. Okay, so these are the three classifications when we talk about harm that hazards can cause. Examples of hazards basically include electricity, which is one of the most common. Electricity is a hazard, right? It can cause harm. It can electrocute you. It can give you a shock. It can even cause short circuit, which is property damage, because if there's a short circuit, that leads to damage of the equipment. Then we also look at moving machine parts. Okay, when you have moving machine parts, this can entangle you into the machine, like a lathe machine with rotating parts can entangle you, right? And this is definitely harm. It will cause injury, which is the first classification. Then we also talk about dust. This is an example of another hazard, dust, because in the workplace like construction, you find dust, you find extreme temperatures. For example, in the Middle East, you have very high temperatures during the summer. In the temperate countries like Europe, you also have extreme cold temperatures, which can cause various kinds of harm, including frostbite and what have you. Okay, so basically, this is just a background of some examples of hazards. There are countless number of hazards which you can think of as examples. Now, hazards are typically classified. There are typically 6 types of hazards, and depending on the source, there are slight variation, but it goes to talk about the same thing. The first types of hazard is what we refer to as safety hazards. Anything to do with machinery, like moving machine parts, like mobile equipment, like working at height, working in confined spaces, laying cables that could lead to trip, wet floors that would cause people to slip. These all fall under the type of hazard which we call safety hazards. Then we also talk about biological hazards. These are the hazards related to viruses, bacterial, it can even be insects, reptiles like snakes, even wild animals. Because at the end of the day, if you're a wildlife worker and you're doing a risk assessment or hazard analysis, you need to consider these wild animals as a hazard because they can actually cause a lot of harm. Then we look at physical hazards. We look at physical hazards. These are basically the hazards that you cannot see and yet they cause harm. Example, noise. You can't see noise, right? But it can cause hearing damage. We talk about vibration. We talk about radiation, like ionizing radiation to be specific, like X-ray, gamma radiations, and so on and so forth. These can cause a lot of harm, yet you cannot see them, and you should be able to recognize these as hazards depending on your work environment. Then we also talk about ergonomic hazards. Ergonomic hazards. These are the hazards that are related to like repetitive motion, like the office workers who use the computer keyboard or even those who play piano and so on and so forth. These can cause some kind of harm to your fingers. A typical example is what we refer to as carpal tunnel syndrome as a result of repetitive motion on the fingers. We also talk about awkward position, how you stand at the workplace. Maybe you have some button which you have to overstretch in order to activate it, and this is happening quite often. That could also lead to some harm related to the posture. Then we also talk about chemical hazards. These are basically the hazards related to harmful chemicals like paints, like fumes, volatile organic compound, acids, and so on and so forth. Then the last one and the most interesting is what we refer to as psychosocial hazards, also referred to as organizational hazards in some contexts. These are hazards related to bullying, harassment. It can be sexual harassment in the workplace, it can be verbal or even physical harassment. These are the hazards related to stressful work environment, excessive workload. We need to be able to recognize all these types of hazards when we do hazard analysis. So viewers, today this is basically what we'll be talking about, and the objective is that you should be able to identify all these hazards in the workplace when we do hazard analysis or risk assessment. Thank you very much for watching and have a great day.